Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast. You are now listening to season 7 of the show. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by the wonderful Ange de Lumiere. Ange is a French qualified lawyer from Paris, and her thriving career spans over 15 years. Ange qualified as a lawyer at a Magic Circle firm, Clifford Chance in Paris, in their property department. She then went on to work for France Telecom for its international operations. During this time, Ange had the opportunity to take part in leading-edge negotiations, including the introduction of mobile phone technology, and assisted in a project to create a global mobile telecom operator that was launched on the stock market in London and Paris as well for Orange. And then she was offered the role of knowledge manager in London at the international headquarters of Orange. In 2005, Ange moved on to explore her clinical hypnotherapy, Reiki, and other modalities related to mind and creativity, founding the Intuition Revolution. So a very, very warm welcome, Ange.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Before we dive into all your amazing projects, experiences, we do have a customary icebreaker question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, what would you rate the hit TV series Suits in terms of its reality, if you've seen it?
Right, so I'm going to go for 5 because I think there's an element of 10 and there's an element of 0, and they kind of even themselves out. I think in terms of personality, it's quite realistic. And the power, interaction, etc. In terms of the legal stuff, there's a lot of license that's taken on, and I doubt that someone would hire as an associate someone who's not qualified at all. But it's fun, isn't it? So that's what matters. I do want to add one thing, and it's not a question you've asked, but I was actually mesmerized almost by the fact that within only 16 minutes of the first episode, they start talking about intuition. So that's my bit that I want to push in. I couldn't believe that. Like, lawyers use intuition a lot without actually saying it or realizing it.
There we go. What a great concrete answer. And I'm also a 5 out of 10 giver. So I think we're well aligned. And with that, we're going to move swiftly on to talk all about you. Obviously, I gave a very factual overview of your journey, but obviously, we'd love to know the personal side of things. So would you mind just telling us a bit more, some of your personal experiences when it comes to your background and your journey?
So which aspects are you interested in the most, the lawyer or the second phase of my career? Because they actually now combine. I call myself a spiritual lawyer. And I love to talk about that because I know, and I don't know if that's the case with you, that when I was practicing what I call human law, I got frustrated a lot because they are human. They are, they have their faults, they have their loopholes, they have all sorts of things that happen that you have to work around. Whereas now, from where I stand, it's a lot clearer, it's a lot smoother, and there's no playing games. So that's been an evolution for me. But I'm also really passionate to go back into the legal world to show lawyers how they can use what I've learned in the past 15 years to enhance whatever they're doing, wherever they're doing, without having to leave the legal profession. Because I think it's probably one of my regrets that I had to leave the legal profession to really be me.
And your values are strongly aligned with mine, and the reason we have the show, because the human lawyer, we're humans at the end of the day. Whatever we do for a profession, it's that human to human and allowing people to be themselves. And you're doing such amazing work, and we're going to unpack a lot of that sort of spiritual work and some of the practices and techniques a little bit later on. But before that, obviously you qualified as a lawyer at a Magic Circle firm in Paris. What were your experiences like working for the likes of Clifford Chance, and maybe how might that be slightly different to any other cities? You may have had friends in London, for example. Any sort of differences?
Oh, I think the office in Paris was quite different from the London one because it was much smaller at the time, and it would still be a lot smaller in Paris. I did love all about the international side of things. I speak fluently 3 languages. I love when culture mixed together, because it expands your horizon. You start looking at things differently. Even just comparing French and English law, because I had a chance to study at the University of Canterbury for a year. So I did, 4 units, and then I compared to French law. All that is really fascinating. And it can also be a ground for innovation, because when you see something that's done in a different way in another country, it gives you ideas of, how could we do this in this way if it works and it's inspiration for everyone? I always believed in cross fertilization, whether it's culturally, on every level. So I loved working in law firm. There are some sites that everybody knows about working in law firm, and about the hours. I was in my 20s. I didn't have any kids. That wasn't a big issue. But then you hit a wall very quickly when you want to have a private life, because you wonder, how am I going to make this happen? And there's also this risk. I had it from very early on, and not because I think it was my risk. I think it's a risk that is in every law firm. It's the risk of burnout, and not realizing when you're reaching that point where you're overworked, when you can't see clearly, and your actual mental health start to be impacted by it. And I'm really pleased to see that this is something that law firms now take on board a lot more: the well-being aspect, the managing the stress, and the self-awareness of our own limits. Because as you just started the podcast with that, we are only human. There's only so much you can push someone before things start to go wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we support that. I want to talk a little bit more, because you then went on to work, I believe, for France Telecom, and were involved in the introduction of mobile technology. That's fascinating, given we're in this new technological advancement of Web3 technology, etc., etc. Can you tell us more about your role there at the time?
So I was put on pretty much anything that had never been done before. And I don't know why, but it suited me to a T. So I started off I was in this, it was a small, at the time, actually, France Telecom was still the Ministry of Telecom. And it had this little subsidiary that was incorporated as a Société Anonyme that dealt with all international operations and everything that the government couldn't do through the ministry. So I was sent to, across the world to discuss submarine cable maintenance agreements. I was sent to put together the first contract for private companies. Until then in France, if you wanted a landline, you just asked for a landline from your local, telecom agency, but there was no way to create a network that would be private and more secure. So I started pulling these contracts together for the operators so that they could finally offer private companies something more bespoke. And then we also went to America, actually, to Washington, to look at this brand new technology, which was actually, in the end, not retained, but it was a cell phone technology that they implemented in Paris as I suppose as a pilot. Everybody was just so excited to be able to be calling people outside of their homes. It was a lot of fun. I loved the technology side of things. I loved the fact that I worked in teams where I was always with, a commercial person, and then there was a technical person, and then there was a financial person, and we worked as a team. So it was very holistic, the approach that we did. And it was a lot of fun and a lot of traveling, which I love. So it was really good.
I love that. So many things that I love as well: innovation, fun, collaboration, exploration, all of these exciting things. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that experience. And I'm undoubtedly a busy time. And then I understand that you took part in a project to create a global mobile telecom operator. So, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced while participating in the project to launch Orange onto the stock market? Because that's quite a thing to have on the resume.
Yeah, and I will say it was a huge team both internally and externally. There was 2 law firms involved, and there was quite a big team internally. We had to pull together a data room of things that were in 17 different countries. I had to work with all the different lawyers. Obviously, I wasn't on my own. I was one amongst, a team internally as well. But I loved the level of detail that I had to get into, but also to get to know each operator and their philosophy and their culture, and try to blend all that in to make something that was where everybody would fit together and find their space. But also there was this interesting dynamics between Orange that we purchased in the UK, that was a startup, the startup mentality, that was literally being combined with a giant, incumbent operator that was used to being dominating so the culture was so different. It was fascinating to try and show actually from Telecom that Orange had a lot to bring to them. It wasn't just them that were going to rule the operation. So it was fascinating on so many levels. And I also am very keen on getting people to culturally integrate and to see the differences and try and understand the subtleties of how people communicate. And, British people communicate in a very different way than French people. And that was part of it as well, of creating that culture.
Yeah, and it's such an important thing, isn't it? Culture, understanding it, how the dynamics work. And I love the word, different, being different. And that's where it kind of leads to my next question, which you've touched on lightly, but I want to go into more detail. Because in 2005, you branched into clinical hypnotherapy and Reiki and other techniques, exploring the mind and creativity. So, just go deeper. What sparked your interest in this area?
So it actually started long before I left the corporate world. I had always been fascinated by reincarnation. And I didn't know why. I just had this feeling that even though I was raised as a Catholic, I didn't understand why I would have only one life and I had to get it right. And if I didn't, I went to hell. And if I did, I went to heaven. And it just didn't make sense. And I was like, if I'm going to be a broad person with interesting experiences, I would have to be at least male and female. So I would have to have at least two lives. Otherwise, I will never understand what the other, gender is experiencing. And then, of course, now gender has evolved so much. It's not just a binary thing, but just to start with that. And so it was really interesting because I took part in a lot of privatization of telecom operators throughout the world. And we were invited to go to Thailand when they decided to privatize their telecoms. And we were invited at the table with the ministries. And I had a Thai minister, and I can't remember what his ministry was, but he was sat next to me. And we started talking reincarnation and Buddhism. And he was telling me how he would go on a retreat, silent retreat, twice a year, even though he was a minister. And I was just fascinated. I was like, oh my God, this is an amazing world. I want to learn more. And I guess when came the point to reinvent myself, because I left the corporate world. I won't go too much into the detail, but because I was now in the UK and I wasn't qualified as a solicitor in this country, I had to find something completely different. I didn't want to go back to uni. I didn't want to study. It wasn't an option back then. So clinical hypnotherapy came first and foremost because I had read so many books, and I don't know if you have read these, by psychiatrists or clinical hypnotherapists who take people into past lives, etc., etc. I thought, I want to find out about this. This sounds really interesting and exciting. The funniest part is that after I trained, I actually felt that it didn't feel right for me to regress people anymore into past life. I didn't feel right to impose that. And so I never actually did regression, but it's what got me into the hypnotherapy. And then I was fascinated because I realized, and especially for lawyers today, and for looking back at myself 15 years back, given that lawyers' minds are so important in the work that they do, right? The intellectual property, the knowledge, the expertise, the fact that we know nothing about how our mind works is actually almost mind-boggling. This is something that is so important for us to understand where creativity comes from, and where also fear, because as lawyers, I don't know if you had this experience, but we're often recruited for the fact that we can see the worst in situations and we can anticipate problems. But then that can take us into a cycle of being quite pessimistic rather than being in the creative mind. And knowing how to go from one to the other, fluidly, is actually a real skill that is very helpful in that profession. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I love that you talk about the mind, because it is the power of the mind. It's that wisdom, it's that expertise, it's that years and years and years of studying and training to answer a question in 10 seconds that you spent 15 years practicing the law about a particular contract or a matter. But you need to understand how to a tool like with PCs, they need software updates. You need to understand how they work so you can best utilize them, protect them, nurture them. You get the best out of them throughout their whole life. So absolutely love that perspective, and your view on that, and how you're sort of bringing value to this community. But again, for people who may be less familiar or just learning about what we're discussing today, would you mind explaining exactly what clinical hypnotherapy is, and maybe Reiki, and just give a bit more of a kind of overview of those things?
So clinical hypnotherapy is a practice where you understand how your mind works, and you take clients into a state of trance to help change their beliefs, so typically people go to hypnotherapists to quit smoking, to lose weight, for panic attacks, etc. But it's actually only a small part of what hypnotherapy can do. There's a lot also of hypnotherapists who specialize in performance, in helping people, even in athletes and stuff like that, because it's all about the mindset and the mind. And so it comes from the understanding of the mind, where we have, some people call it the reptile brain. Technically, it's called the amygdala, which is a part of your brain. that processes information, specifically negative information, but also memories. And whilst it does that, it creates beliefs to help you filter whatever happens in your life through a set of beliefs, because otherwise we would be bombarded by so much information, we get on overload. So it's almost like you're trying to make sense of the world through your experiences that create clusters of thoughts and memories that are actually clumped together, and that becomes your reality. Your reality becomes what you believe, and then you feed those beliefs through more experience that fit with those beliefs. But if you have beliefs that are not actually helpful, then you might want to change them in order to change the way you look at life, but also change what you experience in life. So it's actually very broad and very holistic, but it's also based on science and the understanding of the mind that, it's a serious practice. Reiki is a little bit more fluffy. I might not go into as much detail, but I am fascinated by the fact that, Einstein always says everything is energy. And so Reiki comes from the same principle, that even if you don't realize that everything is energy, you feel it. And there's some things that we feel without being able to explain them. So there's dozens of different modalities around energy. Reiki is just one of them. I'm not going to go too much into the history, but it's linked to a Japanese man who had a vision where he was shown how energy works and how to tap into that energy. But what is interesting for your audience is more to understand how to manage your own energy and how you can be affected by other people's energies, and even affected by the energy of buildings. And this ties into a bit of an anecdote, that when I worked at Orange, when I moved to London, I don't know, but if you know, but Orange used to be owned by Hutchinson, who were from Hong Kong. So they were big into Feng Shui. So when I walked into the hall the first day to go and get my badge to get to my office, I saw two big porcelain elephants by either side of the. I don't know if you've ever heard of Feng Shui.
I have, yes.
And I asked them, "What is this? What is this about? Why are these elephants here?" And I found it kind of funny, but at the same time, I had experienced it firsthand in my own home before I moved to London. And I'm kind of experimental in the way that I approach things. I try something once. If it works, I do it again. And Feng Shui is definitely one of these things that has made a big difference in my life. And I completely understand the impact it can have on you. So I'm not going to say too much more about the energy piece at this point, but I will say one thing. I will ask you a question, actually, Rob. Have you ever entered a room full of people and just felt the energy of the room, or felt that something was going on that wasn't said? Maybe that there was an argument between two people, you entered and you felt that energy that was maybe a bit aggressive, but they were smiling and pretending everything was okay. Has that ever happened to you?
Absolutely. And I think everyone listening must have had a similar experience at some stage in their life. And it lines me to say, there's drains and radiators. You can be around people that can drain your energy, or there's people who can radiate and give you energy and inspire you, because absolutely everything is energy. And that's with the show. People listening, I bring 110% because I want people to be inspired, educated, entertained, bringing on great guests like you today. Whereas if I was talking like this, and we were talking about educating, and it's not going to be exciting. So I'm a big believer in everything is energy. And so I have been in those environments for sure.
So what I've learned through my experience as a Reiki master and going through this this world that seems illogical, is that a lot of the things that we do, we already know instinctively, intuitively. It's just that it's put words onto what you already know, if that makes any sense. And but that can help you if if you were into public speaking, or as you say on your podcast, if you know about energy, then you can actually support whatever you do with an energy that really is going to give it the maximum impact and the biggest chances of success. So we would be fools not to learn about energy. And I've run two podcasts before the one that I'm prepared to launch in June this year. One of them was called High Vibe Monday. And the most popular episode, it's not online anymore, but the most popular episode I had on High Vibe Monday was an episode about energy vampires and how to deal with them. So I'm probably going to explore that again in the new podcast, because it's something that's really important to understand. You can't always avoid people who are energy drains, but you have ways that you can deflect whatever they're doing. And one of the things that fascinates me actually is that people don't need to know how energy works in order to use energy and manipulate people with energy. So I think the more we can learn about it, the better, the wiser we become, and the more we can make it work for us. It's a bit like gravity, you know, it works whether you know it or not. If you learn how to use gravity, you can actually go further than someone who's just passive towards it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I just love everything that you're sharing, and it sort of resonates. And hopefully, as in getting listeners who might be in a place at the moment where their energy levels are a little bit lower, some thoughts, some suggestions, some ideas, some inspiration. So yeah, thank you for that. So I want to move on now because you're also a sort of founder entrepreneur. You are the founder of the Intuition Revolution. So can you explain more about what that is and any inspirations behind it?
Okay, so I am on a mission to put intuition on the curriculum all the way from primary school to university. I have no idea how that's going to happen, but this is my mission. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it is that literally intuition saved my life. I was still a student, a law student back in Paris. I was doing an internship in a company, and thanks to my intuition, I actually missed a bomb attempt in the heart of Paris where I had intended to go shopping. So I know intuition is very powerful, but I know that most people don't understand it. And I didn't understand it back then. What most people don't understand is that there's something called intuitive intelligence, which is the sum of your knowledge, intelligence, intellect, whatever you want to call it, with that piece, that intuition piece. And if they work together, you're literally almost unstoppable. It makes you it will make you the best lawyer in your field. And in a way, I feel looking back, I had that advantage over other people. Even though I didn't know I was intuitive, I could, I would find solutions before I did the research. The research backed up the idea I already had, which is what innovation is all about, isn't it? Intuition and innovation and creativity are very, very intimately linked. So I'm here to effect this revolution so that people can reach their full potential by both understanding their minds, but also by understanding how they can access solutions through inspiration and creativity. And people think they're not intuitive, that it may be, reserved for special people that have been chosen by the intuition fairies at birth, something silly like that. But we are all born intuitive. It's just that the way that we have been taught in school snuffs it out over time. And I actually saw that happen to my own children who are now in their late 20s. And I saw how intuitive they were as little children and how literally that faded away through the school, the schooling years. And I don't want children to lose that, because it's that intuition that enables them to stay engaged, to stay interested, but also to find new ideas, because you can't create a new world from looking at what has been, from the past only. There has to be that opening to new ideas. And I feel that intuition is that piece. So I don't know if I answer your question exactly, but I'm passionate about that.
No, I think you did above and beyond.
Thank you. I've actually, I have a process. I have a signature 5-day challenge that I've run for 7 or 8 rounds that can help people understand their intuition better. It is a very powerful process. Where you start remembering stories of intuition. Because the thing is, if we go back to how the mind works and the hypnotherapy piece and our brain, when something unusual happens to us, we tend to discard it and kind of push it down because it makes us uncomfortable and we're afraid of it. Intuition is typically something like that. If something really weird happens to you, when someone's going to call before they call. Or I even had a teacher share with me that their little nephew knew when their grandfather was dead and said it out loud in the family meeting, and then they received the call. That spooks people out. So you're going to tend to not remember these stories. And because you don't remember these stories, then you don't think you're intuitive. Does that make sense? So we need to first make sure that people understand that intuition is a positive thing. But of course, until you understand your intuition, you're only likely to receive the negative end of it, because it's only going to be there to protect you rather than to inspire you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And
so there's a whole education around intuition is safe. It's not something that's out there. It's actually very practical. Everybody has it. It probably happens to you all the time, but you don't know that it's happening. Let's understand the process. And then I was able to also develop a 4-step process that can help people access their intuition on demand. And and that can inform decisions, and it can make things a lot more interesting. And sometimes the answer you're going to get doesn't make sense, but then when you put it in motion, and this is the part that is probably the more difficult, is to have the courage to implement your intuition, then you get mind-blowing results.
Yeah, I love everything that you just shared there, from, particularly the schooling system to, ensuring, particularly being a father myself, I want that open-mindedness, that curiosity, that creativity to stay with them, because we're only here once. This is life. Let's live it well. Let's really give everything a chance to be the best versions of ourselves, and give everyone the tools to feel like that. And I love that you're talking about intuition in a positive light, and again, giving people some tools, some ideas, some suggestions to how they can, really embrace what we're discussing today. I want to talk about the world, because you mentioned the world. You left the corporate world. So how did that allow you to create a business on your own terms, and prioritize your family life? Because I'm sure that will inspire a lot of people. Time for a short break from the show. Are you still relying on spreadsheets to manage your legal matters? There's a better way to work. Our sponsor, 𝐤𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐿, is the cloud-based legal software that will transform the way your law firm operates. They offer legal practice management and client onboarding software that doesn't cost the earth. In fact, from as little as £49 per month, you can cut out all of those tedious admin tasks that you dread doing each week, each month. Automate the boring stuff, free up more time for the important stuff. That's what you get with 𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐿. Your clients will thank you for it, your bank account will thank you for it, your colleagues will thank you for it, and you can even thank me later for telling you all about it. So head to 𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐿.com/legally speaking to see how 𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐿 can help you. That's CLIO.com/legally speaking. Now back to the show.
So I almost didn't have a choice, because I was in a country where I couldn't practice the law that I knew. And so I had to, first I tried to a classic clinical hypnotherapy practice, but that was still not working with my family life, because I was a single mum to start with. So single mums, it's a lot more difficult. And I lived in a village where they didn't have after school club every day. So, but it's when I took my business online that things started to take off properly. And I thought actually my business was going to die if I was going to take it online, but it actually started to thrive. So I learned a lot about, and I increased my prices as well when I went online. I specialized in business. I work almost exclusively with entrepreneurs and businesses, which is for a clinical hypnotherapist or Reiki, whatever, is very unusual. I actually do work that's slightly different now, which is you could call it business strategy, business mentoring, but it's through the connection to the energy of your business. Because I actually believe that businesses have souls that are different from us, even if you're the founder, that there's this energy. I don't know if you've read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. It's such a wonderful book about creativity. And she's convinced that books have lives of their own, and that the books find their owners. I believe the same happens with businesses. Businesses find their owners and ask their owners to birth them and to bring them to life. So I think that very similarly, my business found me. It decided that the fact that I had been a very pragmatic, grounded lawyer, international business lawyer for 15 years, was instrumental, because most of the people who are going to teach you about intuition or psychic gifts, that's a different thing, I don't want to go too much into that, are not people who are very grounded. They usually have backgrounds that are very, very different. And I haven't met a lawyer yet that does that kind of job. I would love to, but you know what I mean. And that's why I think that my business brings something very different, because I am all about tried and tested methods, and I'm also here to debunk a lot of the myths that people put around intuition and spirituality. People tell you have to meditate every day, that you have to give up coffee or wine, and I'm sorry, but I'm calling the BS on that. You can absolutely be intuitive without having to go on a retreat in India, without having to wear crystals or believe in any sort of belief that is not. You can just be you, because you were born with your intuition. All you need to do is to understand how it works. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's what I always like to talk about. Embrace you, embrace being you. Let's stick with wisdom, because you are bringing lots of wisdom, as we've already heard, to the legal profession. You know, mentoring lawyers. What reoccurring patterns have you noticed whilst mentoring lawyers, and do they struggle with balancing work and their own personal lives?
I think, and it's probably something that coaches experience as well, not just me, people who coach lawyers, is that they have come into the profession with a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of great ideas, and then somehow, because of the hours, because of the workload, because of the context, and to some extent, maybe the shackles to some extent of their profession, then they lose their spark. And that's when they need the help the most to bring that energy back into what they're doing, and that enthusiasm, and that maybe even that vision. When you have a sense of what you're here to bring within a certain profession, be a lawyer or someone another profession, then you do things differently. You have that spark, you have that energy that drives you, and you're also able, I suppose, to draw more boundaries and say, no, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, and be more selective who you work with as well. And I think that's a very important part of the work, is to be so clear about who you are, what you do, and who you serve, which is something that entrepreneurs know a lot. And I know you promote that a lot on your podcast. Lawyers have to become entrepreneurs as well, even if they work within law firms. I could see that right away when I moved from Clifford Chance to Constellicum. The fact that I was surrounded by people who were in the business and who wanted a lawyer who understood the business. So it's about lawyers keeping an open mind, and being also thirsty for knowledge in other areas that can actually feed back into their practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I love that. Again, it's this being open-minded. I'm really hoping people listening to this are sort of like, wow, okay, I hadn't really thought about this, or really getting this new wisdom that you're sharing with us. And that's why I was really keen to have the conversation with you. I want to talk about success. So, success can mean different things to different individuals. What's your definition of success? And do you think you've achieved this? And what is your advice to others who want to carve out a successful career?
So I will say something. I had success on someone else's terms. During my 15-year career as a lawyer, I had a lot of success, but actually I never felt successful. And there was several layers to that. One is that I could not be the mother I wanted to be within that success framework. And that's when two words collided, and I had to leave. But I think success, ultimately for me, success is a blend of different things that tie into your values. So for some people, the money part of it will be really important. For other people, the visibility, the reach, how they can impact the world is going to be an important piece. But for other people, it's going to be that they manage to just keep the balance between work and family. So we all are going to have a very different version of what success looks like to us. What I'm hoping is that I can support a movement where everybody is able to pursue their version of success, and to create that wherever they are, that they don't have, like me, to leave a profession because they feel that they can't actually be successful in the way that they'd like to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And success will evolve. I think the moment you become a parent, if you do, and not everybody does, your version of success starts to evolve. I was listening to a fascinating podcast interview. I'm trying to remember on what podcast it was. Yes, Catherine Morgan. She talks a lot about money. And there was the young man who was incredibly successful, but the moment he became a dad, before that, his version of success was to put the name of his son on, an expensive car on a very expensive car plate. And then he stopped himself in his track and he said, what is this? Why do I even think that? What's more important is for me to stand, in my values with regards to my son. My son will never care about the plate on the car or whatever it is. Or do I really want my son to care about that? So it's also okay to look back and not judge ourselves for a past version of success that we might have espoused, that maybe has been handed down by someone else. I know that was definitely the case for me. I really took on my parents' version of success, and then that's the beauty of reaching midlife or beyond, is that you can be more and more of you because you let go of all this conditioning. Hopefully, you can. I encourage everybody to do, actually, so that they can be truly happy and joyful where they are. And I think that for me, success ties into joy. But then that's my version of success.
I love that. I just look at it in terms of being genuinely internally happy and present in the moment. How many times have you been in a meeting and someone's fake smiling? I'm okay. And that's not the response. That's not the genuine internal. And I think if we can get into a world where, you're internally happy and, like you say, those blended values that, everything you stand for, that'd be amazing, because we are the sum of the parts of the people we hang around and be influenced by that. And I think it's some really good suggestions and some tips that you've shared there. So I hope our listeners, definitely go away and, learn a bit more about this and stay curious. And so on content, in your article with Medium, you did 5 things you need to know to become a top lawyer in your specific field of law. You highlight the following topics: be an internal learner, use your intuition, always act with integrity, even when no one is watching, see other lawyers as allies, not competitors, and look after yourself and keep a healthy work-life balance to avoid burnout. So what is the significance of each of these areas? Just give us a couple of thoughts on that.
Oh, wow, I could write a whole book about that. You're giving me only a few seconds. I was quite proud that I was able to fit in the intuition piece in it, because I do believe that people who use their intuition are more successful than others. And of course, the examples that come to mind are Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, and some people who've done magnificent things on this planet. So I think the other ones, I would almost like to ask you how you felt by reading it and how you resonated with them.
I think it's, everything in life. I just want to briefly mention the Branson documentary. If nobody has seen it, I think is one of the most inspiring things that I've watched for some times. And he left a really good quote, which gave me energy. And sometimes a quote can give you energy. And he said, the brave may not live forever, but the cautious do not live at all. And that just inspired me, gave me energy. And he always said, everything you have, be passionate about and live your dreams. And, if failure happens, come back even stronger and bigger. And I think, so many of the points that you've mentioned there really sort of, intertwine in so many ways with that. And he was also a family person and made sure that he could, be involved with work-life balance. So I really enjoyed watching that. And I think there's some real nuances where you're talking about, particularly around for lawyers in their field, about, can you actually keep that healthy work-life balance to avoid burnout? And I believe the answer is yes, if you have the right people and right tools and right people like yourself around you in your network.
I think some people might think it's easier to do when you work for yourself. I would say to a certain point, but actually maybe not. But I think it's also important that there will be a broader movement within the legal community to foster that balance and to encourage people. And I think to some extent, COVID has had a massive impact on how people work and allowed more flexibility and even created more roles where you don't necessarily work full time if you don't want to, because people are more keen to retain the expertise of some people who are no longer willing to sacrifice their life until they retire. We want to live a life to the full now. We don't want to have to wait to retire to do the things that we love. So there's been a big change from my parents' generation to our generation, and hopefully to our children's generation, where this is going to become the truth, where you were going to pursue self-actualization more than fitting into society. And this will bring a lot more joy, I'm hoping.
Live in the moment is what I like to say. And again, I just love this stuff. It's so fascinating. And I'm really excited and hoping our listeners, as I say, are going to really go back and listen to a lot of the points that Ange mentioned today and dive deeper into this and stay curious. Because Ange, you've touched on it before as well. You're also a podcast host, a podcaster. You've launched, I believe in June 2021, the Intuitive Revolution in Business. What was the focus of that podcast? And can you tell us a little bit more about your upcoming podcast as well?
So Intuitive Revolution in Business was to explore all the different aspects of intuition, how it can help, but also there was a big part, which was to interview professionals, entrepreneurs who had stories of intuition to share. This ties in a little bit to my 5-day challenge that I will be offering as a mini course on Thinkific soon, which is part of realizing how powerful your intuition is to look back on instances when you have listened to it or you haven't. Both of them teach you just as much. what I say is that when you don't listen to your intuition, usually I call that an investment intuition, because you can lose a lot of money. And I have actually people who were brave enough on my podcast to share experiences where they lost their entire businesses because they believed an expert over their own intuition, and it led to some, pretty serious results, which we don't want to happen. So the podcast was about educating around what intuition is, what it isn't. There's a lot of myths, and it was also about sharing these stories, and that was the big bulk of it, and just making intuition mainstream, so that it's not this weird thing out there that we feel doesn't relate to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
Now,
absolutely. And what have we got coming up?
so coming up, I'm writing my second memoir, which is going to be called Spiritual Lawyer, and that shows the micro steps that took me from being a lawyer to being, I suppose, a spiritual teacher, but within the business realm at the moment. So these little, the first 3 chapters are available already if people want to sign up for my mailing list. And it starts actually with this experience that I mentioned earlier, how intuition saved my life. But I also had it started with dreams. And then, with dreams, you don't know if it's true, if it's not. You share them when you've had a vision. So I talk about all these experiences to show that I think they're supposed to inspire people to what is the truth around intuition and spirituality. And what I've realized is that for the listeners that are interested in exploring spirituality within business or separately, is that you need your intuition to make sure that what you feel you're pursuing feels right to you, because spirituality for me is incredibly personal. So, but it's also, and I say it as a joke, but I've seen it, it's a spiritual jungle out there. So once you leave the safe remit of religions or organized religions, you get into this space where everything goes, and people say, and we all know there's cults and false gurus and all sorts of things. So your intuition is here to protect you when you're exploring this curiosity you may have, to keep you safe, and also to check what feels right for you. And when I still taught Reiki to people, I always said to them, take what works for you, leave what doesn't, because we're at different places on our journey. We have different sets of beliefs. We talked about the beliefs. Some of them we can change if we feel that they're not serving us. But at the end of the day, I think we're all here to pursue something different. We're all here to bring something different. We're all unique individuals, and there's no cookie cutter approach to any of this. So I suppose my memoir is to illustrate lots of different things that can maybe open the mind of people to what can happen when you keep that. It's almost like keeping that sense of childlike quality, where you don't discard something and you just go and explore. It's an adventure. And so I will be launching both the memoir and the podcast. And I actually recorded the first episode of the podcast last week. I haven't released it. I've released it on YouTube for people to give me feedback, but not as the podcast yet. And my first one was, am I spiritual? Because I was asked by a member of my community, I'm not even sure if I'm spiritual or not, and what does that mean? And it was very exciting for me to debunk a lot of myths around spirituality. I found a meme where people had 12 signs that you might be spiritual. And to be honest, 10 of them, I couldn't resonate with them at all. Because there's almost this, it's like a fashion, it's the latest thing. Oh yeah, you're spiritual if you do this, or if you do that, if you do that. No, spirituality is not a fashion movement. It's something that comes from deep within. Like one of them was saying, you're connected to your soul. That, to me, that doesn't make sense. We are soul. We are ourselves. We cannot be disconnected from ourselves. That's just nonsensical. But that's something that people say in spiritual realms. So I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, and I'm going to be talking about what is truth. That's going to be my second episode. Probably going to do one about spiritual laws, because I feel a lot of spiritual laws that are bounded about are, again, I can't help thinking that a lot of the organized religions were designed to control people and set some, went beyond the role that spirituality is here for. And that was trying to organize society more than really tend to the soul. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I want to deconstruct a little bit of that and give people more freedom, because I think we've come to a point in the evolution of humanity where we don't just take things at face value anymore. We want to find what feels right for us. We want to find our own truth.
Yeah. And with that,
does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does make sense. And with that sort of finding truth, maybe this could be, before we wrap up, one final question, if I may. What sort of one simple hack you can share with us to go from a problem to a solution? It might be trying to find that truth. What's one simple hack?
So realize that when you identify a problem, this takes you directly into your reptile brain, which is about the fear, which is about making sure that you're safe. And so you tend to see problems everywhere. So in order for you to go from problem to solution, you have to step back. Once you recognize the problem, step back and take yourself into the creative mind. The best way to do that is to do something that you do on autopilot. Like maybe you go for a drive or you have a shower, you go and do the washing up. This takes you into the creative mind where you start relaxing a little bit. People don't understand that the trance state, which is the state where we receive most of our ideas, is very common. We're in trance all the time. It's not just people who are on stages and who are asked by hypnotists to act like chickens, which is pretty terrifying, to be honest. I wouldn't want to be in trance if people said that was trance. Trance is just that state of relaxation where you're doing something that you don't have to think about. So that's as simple as that. So instead of trying to find the solution and getting more into that, there's a problem, I don't know how to solve it, is literally go for a run, go for a walk, do something completely different and allow for the solution to drop in.
I love that, because I always think whenever I'm experiencing something, I'll get out of my chair, I'll go for a walk, and amazing how many ideas, things pop into your head, that creativity happens. And this has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure our listeners will. If they would like to learn more about your journey or the Intuitive Revolution or your podcast, what's the best way for them to contact you? Feel free to shout out any social media handles or website links. We'll also share them with this episode for you too.
So thank you so much for that. I'm Ange de Lumiere on LinkedIn, and I have a community called True Spirituality with Ange on Facebook. That's the two platforms I'm the most active on. But in order to find all the information, it's probably my website, which is theintuitiverevolution.co.uk. And from there, you'll find the links to the podcast. You'll find all sorts of things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much once again. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. But from all of us on the Legally Speaking podcast, wishing you lots of continued success with your career and future pursuits. But for now, over and out. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like the content here, why not check out our world-leading content and collaboration hub, the Legally Speaking Club, over on Discord. Go to our website, www.legallyspeakingpodcast.com, for the link to join our community there. Over and out.